Hey guys, welcome. Excuse me. Welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in Luke's Gospel, chapter 9, and I'm going through this. I think it's an amazing scene, and whenever I come to it, it's hard for me to just let it pass by. And it's when Jesus was transfigured. And again, I want to kind of explore this because I think one of the most astounding things about this story, and this is kind of an extra bonus, is the insight of life after death. There's some, and we get this, even though that's not necessarily the intent of the story, and I'll get back to the intent of the story. But I can't help but just say, okay, here's some truths that we can glean from, some revelation. That you have this scene. You have this scene where Jesus is transfigured. His essence is the brilliance of his essence is just, it shines through his mortal body. Peter, James, and John wakes up into this scene dazzled, right? And what they see is Moses and Elijah, who's there talking with Jesus. Now, again, I'm just gonna. This is again such an amazing story because we said, well, one, how did they know that it was Moses and Elijah? And I'm going to say, just like we may know anything in a spiritual sense, once we shed this mortal flesh, and then secondly, of course, with God giving us the revelation. So they see Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus, and here's the thing. Then I'm going to move on to what else is about that scene right there. But you have Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Moses had been dead some 1,500 years. Elijah had been dead some 800 years, maybe 850 years. And here they are talking with Jesus. Uh, Very cognitive. So they're not talking with Jesus. You know how our goofy movies and stories will show spirituality. And I'm talking about even Christian movies. When it comes to things like this, I often ask, what kind of Christians are writing these movies? That's just my criticism. But they always show the spirituality as, some glossed over, ghostly like vapors, waving, and Jesus is kind of glazed eyes and all that. You see a vibrant conversation here. They are aware. And that kind of tells us that here's the glimpse that we have. This is the revelation that we have, that when we die, there's no loss of conscience. Now, there are different views of what happens after death. Some say, and I mean Christians, some Christians believe in what is called soul sleep. They believe in soul sleep. Okay. Then you have, you have some Christians, some beliefs, not Christian belief, but they believe that life ends, existence ends. But from a Christian perspective, there are some that believe that you sleep in the ground, and that's because kind of a faulty interpretation, I should say, a faulty interpretation of Scripture. But here we see these, and I'm going to say this too, as I can remember that every time we see a spiritual realm scene involving man, there are other scenes that are not involving man, but every time we see one involving man, man is always conscious. Man is always aware, right? He's not, in a dark voidless, right? He's aware. So, for example, I told you about the story about King Saul. That King Saul was a wicked king. He was the first king, and it got to a place where God just I'm not answering him. First, God rejected him. God decided, I'm not having mercy on Saul. And you can contrast Saul and David. God says, I'm not having mercy on him. David had his faults, but God had mercy on him. But Saul, God said, I'm not having mercy. I'm not having mercy on him. And it got to a place where Saul, in his wickedness, never humbled himself before God. And when it came to the end, God says, okay, I'm done with him. I've chosen David. He's going to replace you. You're going to die. But Saul, in seeking out, answered because he was distressed. The prophets were not talking with him. God wasn't giving any kind of word. So again, typical Saul, in his arrogance, not humbling before God, decide again he's going to take matters in his own hands. He goes to the witch of Endor, and she's a spiritress. Saul himself had put out all of the spiritualists and said that if there was any, he was going to put them to death. So now he goes and breaks his own command and goes to a witch of Endor and says, bring me up Saul. And so the witch of Endor brings up Saul. She's shocked, because typically you can't bring up somebody from the dead unless God grants it. She was shocked. But here's the thing. When Saul came up, because Saul had been dead, he had already died. When he came up, he said, why are you disturbing me? Why are you bothering me? And he had a conversation with Saul. The other instance we had when Jesus gave the parable of the rich and poor man. Both were alive. One was rich, one was poor. Both died. And the Bible said that in Hades, he lifted up his eyes. And then he lifted up his eyes, and he saw the poor man in Lazarus' bosom. But they were conscious. He was like, that's the dude right there that was begging at my table. That's that dude right there. That's Lazarus. He was conscious. There was no loss of consciousness. This story is even more interesting because here you have Moses and Elijah, no suffering. They're chilling. Again, they show up and they're talking with Jesus. So that gives us a glimpse for the believer, and especially now in the New Testament, the post-resurrected Christ. The Bible tells us to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, let me show you this verse right quick here. It's not. It's kind of not going to really hit the point that I wanted, but it'll bring home what I want. So 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, And I want to read verse 13 now. This is about the rapture of the church, but I'm not going to focus on the rapture of the church. In verse 13, he says, we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, concerning those who are asleep, so that you will not grieve like the rest who have no hope. So this was the question that they had. What happens when we die? What happens to our loved ones when we die? Are they going to miss the rapture? Are they going to miss the second coming of Jesus? He says, since we believe that Jesus died and rose again in the same way, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep through Jesus. Now, so I'm going to kind of stop there. I just want you to see that point. Where are they when God brings with them, right? Notice he's not gathering them from Hades. All right. So, I'm going to go back and read this because there's a couple of the things I want to bring out before we move on. He says, about 8 days after these words, he took along Peter, James, and went up to the mountain to pray. And as he was praying, the appearance of his face changed. His clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly, two men were talking with him, Moses and Elijah. Again, this is astounding. Moses had been dead, remember, some 1,500 years. Elijah, some 850 years. They appeared with him in glory and were speaking of his death, which he was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. I want to stop now to look at that now. Luke tells us what they were talking about. The other two Gospels do not tell us what he was talking about. Luke tells us exactly what they were talking about. Now, the reason I wanted to bring that out is because one of the things, okay, when you say Moses and Elijah, okay, he says they appeared with him in glory and were speaking about his death. Now, sometimes you have a lot of Christians. And today they're just liars. They're just liars. And if I want to write a book, one of the easiest books, one of the most profitable books that I could write is on I've been to heaven or I've been to hell. Okay? You just, and people say that I've been to heaven, I've been to hell. And they sell, but they're fakes. And usually, I'll tell you the telltale signs that let me know they're fakes. And I'm saying, and let me just say this, I have yet in my 46 years, 47 years of being a Christian, I have yet to hear one of these teachings or testimonies about people who claim that they have been to heaven, been to hell, have angelic visitations, or Jesus himself appeared to them. I have yet to hear one that's believable scripturally. And if you stop and think about it, if I'm going to write a book, the guidelines are quite simple. Heaven is good, hell is bad. And you see people have these visions and stuff. And here is the thing. Here is one of the number one things I could tell you of why I've yet to see anyone. And I've seen and heard a lot of them. They always follow the same playbook. I went to heaven and it was peaceful. Of course it's peaceful. You're not going to say I went to heaven and got jacked, or I went to heaven and I was in the hood, I was in the ghetto. of course, everything is nice. It's kind of like in the name itself, right? So then you say, and then I saw God, and the brilliance, and you describe all goodness, brightness, all of the glamour, not glamour, not the um, how wonderful and breathtaking God is. Okay, that's part of it. You wouldn't go up there and say, even though I have seen people, and again, they're liars. They make their whole ministries built upon lying to people. And like one particular lady who was had a big television network, she go, Jesus appeared to me, and when I looked into his blue eyes. Okay, she's talking about a white Jesus, right? And again, so okay, it's like, okay, yeah, right, okay. Then you again, you see one particular guy said, I went to heaven and Jesus showed me the mansion that's being built for me, and he was having marble and poured it in from wherever, and just again, they just lie. Here is one of the number one reasons why that's a clue. One of the number one reasons that's a clue is the more details they give. The more details. Because in all of the scriptures that we have right here, in all of the scriptures, one of the things that you do not see is the details. We have glimpses, but not details. I went up and I saw Jesus, but, he had a three-piece suit on with a gold tie and gold jewelry. No, we have glimpses. All of the scriptures have glimpses. And another thing is that God doesn't focus on those kind of details. That basically, for the most part, you're going to see that the focus of it will be on his plan and his purpose. That's kind of what you're going to see. You see God focus on his plan. And this is why even here, let's kind of go back to it right quick before we click out. So look at verse 31 again. Now verse 30 says, suddenly two men were talking with him, Moses and Elijah. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his death. So notice he didn't say that they were speaking in, they didn't, notice we didn't clue in on the conversation that Jesus asked, hey, how are things going, fellas? Right? How is the morale of the other Old Testament saints? Right? And of course Jesus went after. I'm being very humorous here. But notice that and normally, remember, you look at Matthew's rendering of this, we don't have what they're talking about. Luke tells us what they are talking about. So you have, again, just a glimpse. And this is we know here that they were talking about his death. God's plan and purpose. Okay? God's plan and purpose. But again, an astounding story here. An astounding story. That's why I say I am fascinated by this story right here. I can say, because notice, Elijah and Moses, they were speaking of his death. Now, we don't even have the details of what they were speaking about, but we know it was about his death. We know. And then it says, which he was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. Now, wouldn't it have been wonderful if we did know the details of it? And of course, anything anything that Jesus would have talked to them about, anything in terms of the heavenly realm would have been so overwhelmingly spectacular to know. I mean, we could know this, right? Okay, so that's again, I'm just fascinated with that. But it also tells us there's no sensation of consciousness. And we also know this, they're good, right? In other words, Moses and Elijah, they're good. Those who died in righteousness in Abraham's bosom in faith, they're good. So I'll say this, you can know that your loved ones in Christ, they're good. They're good. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP The Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.